All right, our third installment walking through the Frederic Malle line by category of my own devising, and today's topic is rose perfumes. Something about fall always has me reaching for roses. Of course, there are the fresh, dewy roses that are nice for spring and summer, or the dark patchouli and oud rose that is nice for winter. But something about fall always has me craving, particularly for Frederic Malle's Une Rose. Now we're in mid-August right now, so there's plenty of hot days ahead, but today there was a pleasant, cool crispness to the air, so I decided to give this a wear. While I was at it, I thought I would do some comparison, as it has been renamed Rose Tonnerre. Apparently this was due to the banning of an ingredient called caramel, which I have found here is described as radiant woody amber odor. And people have debated just how much the fragrance has changed. Now, I fortunately have quite a few versions of Une Rose to do a little bit of a comparison. Although I must say comparing batch codes and caring about reformulation is not really my thing. I think the best approach is just buy what's out there if you like it now as it is, unless you really like the hunt, which I don't. But I have this very old sample of Une Rose back when they gave out these very significantly sized samples. And I can remember having this really wonderful experience the first time I tried this fragrance. I was relatively new to fragrances and testing the Frederic Malle line here and there. And I remember trying Une Rose and wearing it actually on a bus ride and just falling half asleep and kind of smelling it wafting up off my chest and thinking this is just the most amazing fragrance. At the time, I was very intimidated by the price, and I remember I scored 2 of these and thought, well, maybe I don't have to buy a bottle if I just use this very sparingly. Since then, before the change to Rose Tonnerre, I bought a 50 ml of Une Rose, and I bought this guy on accident when I ordered what was labeled Une Rose from, I believe, Selfridges or Harrods, one or the other, and what they sent me was Rose Tonnerre. So, has it changed and how much has it changed? I have a video comparing Une Rose and Rose Tonnerre. One potential flaw of that video is I'm comparing these two, and it's possible that this Une Rose, being not all that old, was already changed and therefore is fairly similar to Rose Tonnerre. This I would say is a good 10 years old, but not the matte cap era, so it's not that old either. So I tried all 3 today. My conclusion of the previous video was that while very close side to side sniffing might reveal minor differences from Une Rose and Rose Tonnerre, they were more or less exactly the same fragrance, and I'd be hard pressed to say one was superior to another. Today though, I wore actually all 3 of these on skin to give it a good proper testing, but we'll do a quick little spray on blotter as well. Basically what I found is what I suspected. The memory is an interesting and a faulty thing, because I had begun to wonder, since that first experience of Une Rose was so revelatory, was it just my limited experience at the time, or had they really gutted the fragrance in such a way that I didn't recognize that same experience? And I have to say 90% of that was my memory. I think when fragrances are new, even if we have experience with fragrance, the first time smelling it, we get quite a different impression from subsequent wears as we get to know the smell better. And I was just so unfamiliar with Rose. I hadn't worn many Rose fragrances, and that wearing of Une Rose back then just really blew my mind. But now smelling them all next to each other, again, they're more or less legible as the same fragrance, but there were some very small differences. In general, a lot of them follow the trend that we seem to get with comparing older fragrances, which sometimes I think you can chalk up to age, because it's always the same things. The older one smells a little bit deeper, mellower, richer. The newer one smells a little bit more fresh, streamlined, bright. But I've got to say the dry down of all of them smells recognizably like the same fragrance. It's the kind of thing where it's only going to bother you if you get really caught up in the details. Let's say you have an old bottle of Une Rose. That's your signature scent. You wore it every day, and then you go spray new Rose Tonnerre. You might find more differences than I'm finding here, just smelling them on strip or skin back to back. So this really old Une Rose definitely has more of that earthy, mushroomy aspect and feels just like one notch on the color wheel darker. I've always gotten a strong kind of wine dregs smell from this fragrance, which is really nice, and it's quite prominent in this old Une Rose here. Une Rose to me has always been a very deep, dark, sort of gothic rose, but it achieves this without the use of patchouli, which is kind of interesting because a lot of the deep, dark gothic roses use patchouli to bring out the earth. Or, correction, it lists patchouli, but the patchouli isn't prominent. It's not an obvious patchouli. So it lists vetiver, patchouli, and castoreum. Now, there's nothing animalic to me at all, but maybe it adds some of that deep darkness to the fragrance, the castoreum. I'm not sure what accord they're using. I've smelled castoreum accord in some Serge Lutens that smelt more recognizably animalic than anything I get here. So overall, it's a deep, dark, juicy, luscious rose. As the original name implies, Une Rose, it's like the one rose to rule them all, that red, velvety, deep rose sensation. Rose Tonnerre does smell more bright, more fresh, a little bit more, I don't want to say aquatic in the sense of like 90s aquatic, but like I can almost imagine like a sea breeze in the distance. And I believe Tonnerre had something to do with the word storm. This Une Rose, this Rose Tonnerre, very similar, but these are more recent in terms of date. Yeah, it's the kind of thing you think you're smelling a difference and then you go back and that difference goes away. And that to me says that they're more alike than they are dissimilar. Also, as they dry down, maybe most of the differences are just in that flash of a top note. But I would say if you used to like Une Rose, I think you can still buy with confidence the new Rose Tonnerre. Yeah, I'm struggling here to find much difference. So I think my revelatory experience of the original was mostly due to its unfamiliarity and not the fact that it had massively changed since then. Anyway, I suppose we should move on, but I'll mention it's by Edward Fleischier, as you can see right there. I like to read a little bit of the description since these videos aren't just a review, but also just about having all the information in one place about these fragrances. So it says, in the middle of a misty garden at night, a rose gives its most beautiful scent. The air is stormy, there's the storm, simulating the darkest sense of nature. Let's skip a little bit. A new base, a sort of olfactory sketch which he represented, blah, blah, blah. Truffle, the blend of dark, woody, animalic notes was intended for men's fragrances, but the two partners came up with the seemingly paradoxical idea of marrying it with the quintessential feminine rose. That's interesting. I always find things in these blurbs that I didn't know before. And I would say if you're worried about rose being feminine, there's a darkness and an animalicness to this that I think will speak to the guys. One last smell test and we'll move on. Yeah, I would say right now, if I'm smelling any difference at all, the oldest Une Rose has a little bit more of that smell of wine, of old wine casks. But a really lovely rose fragrance, very powerful, very deep, a little goes a long way, an icon. So moving on, we've got Rose et Cuir. This one is interesting as it was created by Jean-Claude Elena, and it's very different for his style. To me, this is like, if we think of sculpture, like if his other ones are like Alexander Calder with all these little tiny moving pieces that kind of swirl in air, this is like some brutalist architecture where it's just like hard, straight lines and intersecting objects. We get just a few simple big dashes of ingredients that come together to create something quite powerful and quite direct. Now, this famously has been described as not having any rose or any leather. But again, Jean-Claude, master illusionist, kind of creates the sense of both at the same time without using either. So he famously used IBQ in this, which was kind of an old-fashioned leather ingredient. Right off the bat, it's all about this big, sort of bitter green geranium smell. And you get a bit of that leatheriness. I always get something sort of nutty about the leather in this. Oh, this is so interesting smelling it after Une Rose. I haven't smelled this one in a while. This one somehow gets neglected in my collection, but it's one where I really love the dry down. And one time I was doing laundry and I smelled it on a shirt. I was like, what was I wearing that day? It was driving me crazy trying to remember what that smell was. That was so nice. And it was Rosé Cuir. So it has a really beautiful dry down. To me, yeah, I'm just shocked smelling it now, how stemmy and green. It's just like you bit into a bitter green twig and it's going in your mouth and up through your nasal passages. To me, yeah, it's almost like the two things, the rose and the leather, are combined into like this one sort of illusion of a rose made of leather or a leather made of rose. You kind of can't delineate the two, but it's these two chunks of smell that are kind of like intersecting with each other. So it says geranium, black currant. I think, yeah, the black currant and the geranium are giving that big sense of like bitter greenness at the beginning. I remember the first time I smelled this, it reminded me of something, and that was Diptyque's Lombardon L'Eau, which also has like a very bitter green black currant note. With more wearings, I smell them as more and more different, but I think if you smell that can get you somewhat in the ballpark. Although I think this is more interesting and challenging than that. So to me, it's very bold for Jean-Claude Ellena, very like large, bold brush strokes compared to his usual kind of little fine, delicate brush strokes. And as like an artist, it's really interesting to see this development into different periods. In a way, Heaven Can Wait is a little more of a return to his older style than Rosé Cuir. So yeah, it's hard to describe. I can't say in all the years smelling other roses I've ever smelled anything quite like it. There's almost this, a little bit of like a synthetic kind of like copier paper smell that I get, something almost like Comme des Garçons would do, of office supplies. Maybe that's something in the IBQ, but if you like, yeah, right after you like photocopy something, the smell of like the hot paper and the toner, ever so slightly. But yeah, a really interesting kind of nutty, leathery, rosy dry down, but in no way a rose like Une Rose. That's like an immediately legible rose. It's a rose of illusions. So here we go. Next one before I get too poetic. Lipstick Rose. I don't own a full bottle of this one, but it is a very fun fragrance by Ralph Schwieger. And here we go. I think the reason I've not bought this is because I've got so many Chanel. Ooh, very nice. And it's a little bit of like a throwback type rose fragrance. That reminds me a bit of Chanel, but now smelling it, you know, there's no Chanel that smells like this quite exactly. Very nice fruity opening, almost like bubblegum fruity in the top. It mentions grapefruit, violet. Yeah, I can see violet. Has a little bit of that like dry, powdery violet candy kind of smell. Rose, iris, raspberry, vanilla, and white musk. So yeah, this is like the very happy-go-lucky, bright, fruity, a little bit powdery, a little bit dry, a little bit retro kind of rose. Really lovely though. I'm kind of selling myself on it right now as we go. See anything else? Well, I guess we'll read the description. An eternal gesture of seduction, that intimate moment when a star, in the quiet comfort of her dressing room, looks in the mirror and glides her lipstick over her lips. Powdery fragrance produced by the violet and the iris, two flowers associated with eyeshadow and other makeup. So yeah, it's a sense of this kind of old Hollywood star and makeup. It's not quite makeup in the way that sometimes like Chanel iris makeup goes. It's not as powdery as that. All the fruits kind of add a juiciness that I've never experienced in Chanel, for example. So gosh, smelling this again, kind of feeling like I need a bottle. But yeah, really lovely, bright. I almost get like the vaguest smell of incense deep in there. But yeah, beautiful. It dries down, I remember, to like a really nice kind of like musky, powdery, violety kind of thing. So that's Lipstick Rose. Next up, maybe surprisingly, unbelievably, I don't own a bottle of the Queen herself, Portrait of a Lady, maybe the most famous or the most well-known of all the Frederic Malle fragrances. Again, I have nice memories associated with trying a lot of these. I remember one birthday going to the Barney's counter, determined to pick something out. And I remember this was high in the running. I remember really liking the opening, and I had gotten some on my scarf that day. And I remember smelling the scarf for weeks after, thinking it just smelled so great. But at the time, something in the dry down didn't quite sit right with me. I remember feeling that the patchouli in the dry down got quite dusty in a way that I didn't really like. It's almost like it's become so familiar, such a cliche, that then I just never really got around to getting my own bottle because I know how it smells so well. But recently, I'm starting to feel the itch. Partly, one, I think now that the trend has died down, you don't smell it around so much, although I have smelled it on people here and there in New York City. It feels like the time is ripe to maybe revisit it now that some of the hype has died down and people have moved on. But the biggest reason is a little bit funny in that I've gotten the ancillary products. I've got here the Portrait of a Lady hand cream, and before that I picked up the Portrait of a Lady body wash. And I have to say, using the body wash really started to sell me more and more on the fragrance and make me want a bottle of the actual fragrance myself. This one, again, it's hard to compare memories with the present, but I feel like my memory of the dry down, is that it was a bit more dusty and a bit more heavy on the patchouli. But the newest version, the experience I had from the body wash that I liked so much, almost goes a little more woody, almost a little more like Middle Eastern rose kind of scent, which is interesting. Again, I'm sure it's a mix of the two. I'm sure things have been tweaked and changed over the years. After all, it's like a 20-year-old fragrance by now. But by no means has it been gutted or is it shadow of a former self. It's still quite strong, quite long-lasting, quite beautiful. What I really like about this is how it has such nicely delineated segments, and that's something I talk about over and over with Frederic Malle, that everything has a very beautiful clarity to it. Nothing is ever muddled or muddy or excessive. Nothing is ever out of place. Everything does its role in the composition just perfectly. You can't add anything or remove anything. So, Portrait of a Lady, there's this really jammy blackberry juiciness at the front, which gives you a beautiful opening without relying on citrus, a beautiful fresh burst at the beginning. And then that transitions beautifully into sort of the juicy, jammy qualities of this red rose, which then eventually settles down onto that beautiful, long-lasting trail of sort of woody patchouli. I do think the woodiness has a bit of the kind of smell of amber woods that we've become over familiar with these days. And I think Une Rose is a little bit guilty of that as well. But To me, they're handled just perfectly here. They just give diffusion, they give a nice trail, they give a nice dry down. There's nothing harsh or scratchy or cloying about it to me. So I'm completely fine with that. I think these materials play a role in perfume, and a good role at times. They just can get a bit overused or a bit used in overly high doses in pursuit of longevity and sillage. So I guess let's visit the Portrait of a Lady blurb. It says, an exceptional fragrance by Dominique Ropian. Enhances the opulence and voluptuousness of the Turkish rose in extravagant proportions. Now, there's been a lot of stories told by Frederic about this over the years in interviews, and I remember one being kind of funny that they really struggled with it being too beautiful and also too expensive, with the amount of rose and fine ingredients. They always like to talk these things up. But I found that interesting because it's true that I think as an artist, you worry if something's too beautiful because it might be, if everybody likes something, then maybe it's mundane, or there's something about perfect beauty that is maybe a little bit mundane. The most memorable faces, let's say, of models or actresses, there's always something a little bit wrong or imperfect about it. And I think Frederic Malle has a similar kind of aesthetic pursuit in fragrance. So I found it interesting that this huge hit, this iconic, amazing fragrance, they kind of debated back and forth, like, can we release this? Is this too pretty? Is this too beautiful? And what a romantic notion of something being too beautiful to release into the world. So it says, this immoderate rose, as in lacking moderation, there's a good word, magnified by woody tones, amber, and incense. The designers are redrawing the contours of the cypress, an olfactive family synonymous with the finest airs of 20th century perfume. So there's again a little bit of a shout out to like a classic genre, but redefining it. Yeah, it's so nice. That freshness is just, that's the master stroke to me, that berry freshness at the beginning. It's like the perfect aperitif. It like whets your palate for what's to come, which is this beautiful voluptuous rose on this like endless woody patchouli trail. It's really interesting, Malle's use of patchouli. Having experienced other patchoulis that go more earthy and dark, there's never that sense of, well, one hippie patchouli, never ever in any of these. But yeah, all earthiness is sort of scrubbed clean, and you're just left with sort of the woody aspects of it and sort of the depth that patchouli can add. So gosh, I guess I discovered I need to pick up 2 more bottles of Frederic Malle here before too long. Let's do a quick smell through all of them, because I think what's really interesting is just comparing how different similar themed fragrances can be handled in the same house. So yeah, Rose Tonnerre really carries through this bitter green note, really fairly bitter, and I can see that being challenging for some. Une Rose smells pretty much exactly the same at this point. Any small differences in the first spray have more or less equalized. Une Rose, the old Une Rose, also more or less exactly the same, if a little bit softer, but again, that could just simply be that I sprayed less. But I think that's often the case with reformulation, that even if there's little tweaks that you smell immediately, once it dries down, it more or less becomes exactly the same thing. Rose Cuir really feels like kind of a punch in the face compared to those. Again, yeah, I don't know why, but for me, I think that leather material is really, really nutty, like roasted peanuts. I get, yeah, that roastiness, and it really does imply rose without literally smelling like rose. I get it. I get what they did there. And here's Lipstick Rose. Oh yeah, now we're getting to that, yeah, powdery. It's like your mother's violet candies got crushed up and left at the bottom of her purse. Everyone remembers that smell, like your mom hands you a candy out of her leather purse, and somehow like the taste, it's a little bit old, and it somehow has a little bit of like purse taste in there still. Really just fun and uplifting, still has some of that fruitiness. Definitely the most powdery and the most bright. This is like a bright pink rose. Each of these also really invokes a different shade of red, which is something really interesting. And Portrait, there she is, yeah. It really smells now, having experienced a lot more perfume since the first time I tried it. It really smells inspired by Middle Eastern perfumes to me and their treatment of rose, but of course minus the oud. But what really sticks out is even after the top notes have started to fade, there's still this really beautiful juiciness that carries through and keeps it from being overly heavy. Even though it does have a huge recognizable trail, it never feels heavy or suffocating to me because there's a lot of airiness to it and a lot of brightness that carries through in that juicy sort of, what do they say? I want to say like blackberry to me. Let's say, what do they say about, what is the top note? Portrait. Actually, it says rose, patchouli, sandalwood, incense. Oh yeah, blackcurrant, raspberry, clove. Interesting. Yeah, blackcurrant really smells like fresh blackberries to me. So there you go. Hope that wasn't too rambling and hope that was a little bit useful. It's kind of late at night when I'm recording this, but I wanted to do it while I still had the 3 Oud roses on my skin. And that's my roundup of Frederic Malle's roses.